The red dust of Kepler 442b covered everything. Commander Teo stood at the edge of the scientific outpost and looked out at the flat, empty plains that stretched to the horizon. The sun here was smaller than Earth's sun, and it cast long shadows across the rocky ground. 3 generations of humans had lived on this world now, and it still felt like a foreign place to most of them. The outpost was small but sturdy. Metal buildings were built half underground to protect against the harsh winds that sometimes swept across the plains. Solar panels covered the roofs, catching what little energy the dim sun could provide. Teo had been the commander here for 5 years, and he knew every corner of this place. He knew the names of all 73 people who lived and worked here. He knew their hopes and their fears. His second-in-command, Minnie, approached him with a tablet in her hands. She was the outpost's chief medical officer, and her face looked tired. They all looked tired these days. Resources were always low, and work was always heavy. "Commander, we need to talk about the water supply again," Minnie said. "If the recycling system breaks down like it did last month, we won't have enough stored water for more than 2 weeks. Teo nodded. He had heard this worry many times before. "I know. Jiwoo is working on improving the system. He says he needs another month." Min-ai looked at the horizon with him. "We need another month for everything," she said quietly. Before Teo could respond, alarms suddenly started ringing through the outpost. Red lights flashed on the walls. Both of them turned and ran inside. In the control room, young Da-won sat at the communications station, her eyes wide with shock. "Commander, there's a ship," she said. "A large ship is falling toward us from the sky. It's damaged, really damaged. I don't know what kind of ship it is. It's not human." Everyone in the room froze. They had never seen another ship on Kepler 442b. They had only had contact with Earth through their communication relay, which worked when it felt like working. The idea of another spaceship, a non-human one, made everyone's heart beat faster. Teo quickly moved to the main screen. He could see it now. A massive craft of strange design, covered in what looked like crystalline structures that caught the light. The ship was trailing fire and broken pieces as it descended through the atmosphere. It was clearly falling, not landing. "Jiwoo!" Teo called out. "Can we calculate where it will land?" The engineer appeared in the doorway. He was a tall man with quick hands and a quick mind. He looked at the screen and did some fast calculations. "Maybe 10 kilometers northeast of here," Jiwoo said. "It's coming down fast. If we're going to help, we need to move now." Teo made his decision. "Get the emergency teams ready. Get the medical equipment. Hae-jin, Soo-jin, I want you both ready to go." Hae-jin was the outpost's nurse, and Soo-jin was the botanist. She wasn't medical staff, but she was calm under pressure, and that mattered. Within 20 minutes, they had loaded a transport vehicle and were driving across the rocky plains toward where the ship would land. The impact was tremendous. The ground shook when the massive alien ship finally hit the Earth. A cloud of red dust rose into the sky like a cloud of blood. Teo drove the vehicle as close as they dared, and the team got out with their medical kits and emergency equipment. The ship was enormous up close. Parts of it were twisted and broken. Pieces of metal lay scattered on the ground. Strange, glowing lights flickered inside the damaged structure. There was a sound of something moving inside the ship, something heavy. Then a door opened. Something emerged. The being was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. It was made of something that looked like crystal or glass, and it glowed from within. Its shape was strange, angular and geometric, with points and edges that caught the light. It moved in a way that seemed both graceful and unnatural. Min-ai stepped forward, her medical training overriding her fear. "Don't be afraid," she called out in the calmest voice she could manage. "We are here to help you." More beings emerged from the ship. There were 5 of them, all of the same general shape but in different sizes and with different colors of internal light. They looked at the humans with what might have been fear or confusion. Tayo could not tell. "I am Vane," one of the larger beings said. Its voice sounded like wind chimes mixed with something electronic. "We are the Vethrai. Our ship is destroyed. We come from far away, fleeing those who wish to destroy us. Are you going to attack us?" "No," Tayo said firmly. "We are not going to attack you. We are going to help you. My name is Tayo. You are safe here." He was not entirely sure this was true. He had no idea what these beings wanted or what they could do. But he knew that they were hurt, and they needed help. That was enough. Min-A approached the largest of the Vethrai. She could see now that one of them had what looked like a deep crack running through its crystalline body. "You are injured. Come with me. I can help with that." For several long moments, the Vethrai did not move. Then Vane slowly moved forward. The others followed. The next hours were busy. Heijin and Min-A worked to help the injured Vethrai. They discovered that the beings were made of silicon-based material, very different from human biology, but they could understand pain and injury. Min-A used materials from the medical kit to help seal the crack in Vane's body. It was not a perfect repair, but it helped. Jiwoo examined the ship and discovered that it was beyond any repair they could do. "The power systems are completely dead," he told Tayo. "Without major repairs, they cannot fly again." This meant the Vethrai would have to stay. That night, Tayo made the hardest decision. He knew that every food unit in their storage was measured carefully. Every liter of water was counted. Every kilogram of medical supplies was needed for the humans. They had very little extra. But as he looked at Van and the other Vethrai in the medical bay, sleeping or resting in the dim light, he realized he could not turn them away. They were alive because of luck and small decisions. These beings were alive, and they needed help. That was the real measure of what they were as a species. "We will take care of them," he told his team simply. "We figure out the rest later." Min-A smiled at him. It was a tired smile, but it was real. Over the following months, something unexpected happened. The Vethrai did not just accept human help. They began to contribute. They helped repair buildings and improve systems. They worked in the gardens with Sujin and helped increase food production. They worked in the medical bay with Min-A. They worked with Jiwoo on the damaged ship, trying to salvage what they could. And slowly, the cold distance between humans and the crystalline beings began to warm. Vane spent long hours talking with Tayo, learning about Earth and humanity. The Vethrai leader began to understand that the humans had helped them not because they expected something in return, but simply because it was the right thing to do. One evening, 6 months after the ship had crashed, Vane asked to speak with Tayo alone. They stood together on the same high place where Tayo had stood that first day, looking out at the red plains. "I will never forget this," Vane said. "When my people needed help, you helped us. You had nothing. You still have nothing. But you shared what little you had. I promise you, Tayo, when humanity's darkest hour comes, the Vethrai will remember. We will help you as you have helped us." Tayo did not believe that such a dark hour would come. He hoped it would not. But he accepted the promise, and he shook hands with the crystalline being, human hand touching alien material. It was warm. 20 years had passed since the Vethrai ship crashed on Kepler 442b. The galaxy had changed in that time, and so had humanity's place in it. The small outpost where Tayo had once stood watching red dust had grown into something much larger. Humanity had spread across the stars, establishing colonies and trade routes, building relationships with different alien species and different worlds. Commander Tayo, now much older, had become more than just a local commander. He was known throughout the human worlds as a diplomat and a voice of peace. His gray hair and lined face told the story of 2 decades of hard work and careful decision-making. He had argued for peaceful expansion, for trade over war, for understanding over conflict. Many listened to him. Some did not. His daughter, Yoon-ji, had chosen a different path. While her father spoke for peace, Yoon-ji had joined the Colonial Defense Force. She was brilliant at military strategy, and she had climbed the ranks quickly. At 32 years old, she was already a colonel, one of the youngest in the entire military force. She did not believe her father was wrong about peace, but she believed that peace needed to be protected and defended. They had not argued about this directly, but there was a certain distance between them now. Tae-oh hoped his daughter's strength would never be needed. Yoon-ji prepared as if it certainly would be. The warning signs came slowly at first, like clouds building on the horizon before a storm. Intelligence reports began to arrive on Earth from outpost commanders in the outer colonies. There were stories of a huge military force preparing itself on the far side of the galaxy. The reports mentioned a species called the Kurathi Empire, a civilization that had been growing stronger and more aggressive with each passing year. The Kurathi were different from other species humanity had met. They believed in conquest and dominance. They believed that a species was either above or below them, and there was only one way to settle the question. They had already conquered 23 smaller civilizations and absorbed them into their empire. Tae-oh read the intelligence reports carefully. He studied the data about Kurathi military strength, and then he called for a meeting with the leaders of Earth's government. "We must reach out to the Kurathi," he said. "We must talk to them. We must show them that peaceful coexistence is possible. We must convince them that we do not wish to be conquered, but neither do we wish to fight." The government leaders listened. Some agreed with him, others were not sure. But most of them thought Tae-oh was a wise man, and they agreed to try his approach. They sent messages toward the Kurathi Empire, hoping for dialogue. They waited for responses. Meanwhile, Yoon-ji was making her own preparations. She did not trust the Kurathi, and she did not believe that simple words would stop them if they decided to attack. She began to strengthen the Colonial Defense Force. She improved the training programs. She designed new strategies for fleet movement and defense. She argued with the government for more weapons and more ships. "If we show weakness, they will attack," she told the council. "If we show weapons, they will attack," her father countered in the same meeting. Their eyes met across the room. Both of them believed they were right. Both of them were trying to protect humanity. The answer came not in words, but in fire. The Kurathi did not respond to the messages of peace. Instead, they responded with an invasion. It was sudden and brutal. In a single day, 3 human colonies were attacked. In a single week, 10 more were under assault. The Kurathi did not come to negotiate or to discuss. They came to conquer. The Colonial Defense Force, despite Yoon-ji's preparations, was not ready for the scale of the attack. The Kurathi had warships that were larger and more powerful than anything humanity had built. They had weapons that could destroy entire cities, and they had something that humans had not expected. They had no fear. They did not hesitate. They did not hold back. They simply attacked and attacked until everything human was destroyed or conquered. One of the first targets was the outer research stations. Tae-oh had refused to abandon them despite the warnings. He stayed on Station 7 as it came under attack, helping to evacuate the scientists and researchers who worked there. He was helping the last group of people board a transport ship when the Kurathi weapons hit. The explosion was bright and fast. Yoon-ji learned about her father's death in a military briefing 3 hours later. The commander presenting the information was professional and calm, but the words hit Yoon-ji like physical blows. Her father was gone. The man who had always believed in peace had died trying to protect other people. The grief was sharp and deep, but Yoon-ji did not have time to sit with it. She was promoted immediately to general, the youngest general in the history of the Colonial Defense Force. The government had finally realized that her father's approach had not been wrong, but it had not been enough. Peaceful intentions did not matter when an enemy had no desire for peace. Yunji took command of the remaining defense forces. She coordinated the evacuation of millions of civilians from attacked colonies. She planned strategic retreats. She fought battles that she knew she was losing, but she fought them in ways that saved lives. Month after month, the situation grew worse. The Korathi Empire was methodical and powerful. They did not make mistakes. They had conquered a third of the human territories before Yunji managed to establish a strong defensive line. The remaining human worlds huddled behind their shields, hoping that something would change, that some miracle would arrive. But no miracle came. The Korathi were slowly, inevitably advancing. Military analysts gave humanity 6 months before they were completely overwhelmed. 6 months before there was nowhere left to fight. Yunji sat in her command center deep underground on the moon base, looking at the strategic map. Red lines showed Korathi territory. Blue lines showed what was left of humanity. The blue was getting smaller and smaller. She thought about her father, about his belief that kindness and peace could solve any problem. She wondered if he had been right about anything at all. She picked up a communication device and spoke to her staff. "I want to reach out to our old allies, the Vethrai, the Krell, the Ethereals, any species that has had peaceful contact with us. Send messages to all of them. Tell them what is happening. Ask for help." Her officers looked at her with doubt in their eyes. It was not a military strategy. It was something more like hope. "Send the messages," Yunji commanded, "and keep fighting. We do not give up until there is no ground left to stand on." The messages were sent out into space, traveling at the speed of light, hoping to find allies in civilizations that might remember that humanity had once shown them kindness. It was a desperate hope, but it was all that remained. The underground medical center on Earth was filled with the sounds of pain and desperation. Dr. Mine moved between the beds, checking on patients, dispensing medicine, offering comfort where she could. She was very old now. Her hands moved slower than they used to, but her mind was still sharp and her determination was unbroken. Around her, younger doctors and nurses worked without stopping, trying to save lives that the Korathi attacks had broken and burned. Mine had seen much in her long life. She had been young when she helped the Vethrai on Kepler 442b. She had watched humanity spread across the stars. She had known Teo, had watched him grow from a careful young commander into a wise old leader, and now she watched him only in her memory as she tried to keep his daughter alive through injury and grief. Yunji had been brought to the medical center a week ago after a Korathi attack on the military command base. She had survived, but barely. A burn covered half her body, and she had broken ribs and internal injuries. Min-A personally oversaw her treatment, spending hours each day helping the younger general recover enough to think clearly. "You should rest," Min-A told her as she changed the bandages on Yunji's burns. "I cannot rest while people are dying," Yunji said. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were still determined. Min-A understood. She had not rested much either, not since the attacks began. The medical center received more patients than it could handle. They had to make impossible choices about who to help first, whose injuries they could treat, and whose they could only make comfortable in their final hours. The situation was becoming hopeless. In the streets above the medical center, refugees crowded together. Entire cities had been evacuated. Millions of people were living in temporary shelters, waiting for the Korathi to arrive and waiting for humanity to fall. Yunji recovered slowly, and she began to spend more time in the communications center. She had sent out the messages to potential allies, but nothing had come back. 3 weeks of silence, 3 weeks of waiting for a response that might never arrive. A young woman named Da Wan worked in the communications center. She was 23 years old, and she had never known anything but the war. When Eunji began spending time there, Da Wan welcomed her. The young operator had been trying to reach out to the old Vethrai frequency, the one that had been used 20 years ago. But the equipment was broken and old. "We could try to repair this," Da Wan said, showing Eunji a piece of equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum. "It is the original communication relay from the early colony days. The frequency is still recorded in the system. If we could get it working, we might be able to reach the Vethrai. If they still exist, if they still listen to that frequency." Eunji studied the old equipment. It was a long hope, a hope based on nothing but the memory of a promise made by an alien being 2 decades ago. But it was a hope, and that was more than nothing. "Fix it," Eunji said. Da Wan worked on the old relay for 2 days without stopping. She was tired but determined. She had grown up hearing stories about the Vethrai, about how they had helped the colony on Kepler 442b. It was one of the few good stories in human history, one of the few moments where humanity was remembered as being kind rather than harsh. When the relay finally came to life, the lights on the equipment glowed green. Da Wan and Eunji looked at each other. "What do we say?" Da Wan asked. Eunji thought about her father. She thought about what he would have wanted to say to the Vethrai. She thought about kindness and promises and the long memory of a species made of crystal and light. "Tell them the truth," Eunji said. "Tell them what is happening. Tell them about my father. Ask them if they remember." Da Wan began to record a message. Her young voice traveled out from the earth on an old frequency toward the stars. She talked about humanity's struggle. She showed images of the Karathi attacks, of cities burning, of people dying. She talked about Tayo, who had been kind to the Vethrai when they had nothing. She ended with a simple question. "We remember your kindness. Do you remember ours?" The message was sent, and then they waited. For 3 days, there was nothing. The Karathi continued their advance. More colonies fell. The military situation grew more desperate. Eunji received reports that supplies were running out. Food was becoming scarce. Medicine was nearly gone. The water purification systems, which had always been fragile, were beginning to fail. Mine continued her work in the medical center, treating the wounded and dying with the same careful attention she had once given to a Vethrai being with a crack in its crystalline body. She did not complain. She did not give up. She simply worked, doing what needed to be done. In the refugee centers, children asked when the war would end. Parents had no answer. Teachers tried to maintain some kind of education, some kind of normal life for the young, but it was difficult when everything was falling apart. Da Wan continued to maintain the old relay. She checked it constantly, listening to the empty static, hoping for a response that might not come. She had put all her hope into this old equipment, this ancient frequency. It was foolish, perhaps, but hope was all that was left. Then, on the 4th day, the relay suddenly came alive with static and signal. A message was coming through. Da Wan's hands shook as she processed the incoming transmission. "General," Da Wan called out, "we have a response." Eunji moved as quickly as her healing body would allow. She arrived in the communications center as Da Wan played the message. A voice like wind chimes and music came through the speakers. "I am Vane," the message said. "I remember the kindness of humanity. I remember Teo. I remember the red plains of Kepler 442b. The Vethrai do not forget those who show us mercy when they have nothing. We are coming. We are bringing others with us, species that humanity has helped in the past. We are coming because it is right. We are coming because we remember." The message ended. For a moment, the communications center was completely silent. Then Da Wan began to cry. Tears of hope, tears of relief. Yunji stood very still, her burned hand pressed to her mouth, as she felt the weight of despair lift slightly from her shoulders. She did not know if the Vethrai and their allies would arrive in time. She did not know if they would be strong enough to stop the Korathi, but she knew now that humanity was not alone, and sometimes that knowledge alone was enough to keep fighting. Minnie continued her work in the medical center below, unaware of the message. But something changed in her that day. Her hands moved slightly faster. Her voice grew slightly stronger, and when she spoke to the wounded and dying, there was something new in her words, not just comfort, but a kind of quiet confidence that the world was not yet finished with humanity, and that kindness was not forgotten by the stars. The Vethrai fleet appeared near Jupiter like a sudden burst of crystal and light. The sensors on Earth detected them first, thousands of ships, massive and beautiful, arranged in a formation that suggested both power and purpose. When Yunji saw the signals on the military screens, she felt her breath catch in her throat. They had really come. The Vethrai had actually come. But more than that, the sensors were showing other ships, different designs, different energy signatures. As the communication systems began to identify the incoming fleet, the names appeared on the screen. Krell, ethereals. 3 other species that humans had helped in the past decades. An entire alliance had arrived. Vane's ship moved forward faster than the others, and a holographic transmission appeared in the command center. The Vethrai leader materialized before Yunji and her officers. The crystalline being's form was larger now, more refined, glowing with colors that seemed to shift and change as it spoke. "General Yunji," Vane said, and the being's voice carried the weight of years and memory. "I remember standing on the Red Plains with your father. I remember the kindness he showed us when we had nothing. I remember the promise I made. When your people faced darkness, we would remember. We have remembered. And we have come." Yunji stepped forward. Her burned body still healing, but her spirit strengthened by the presence of the Vethrai. "I am grateful," she said simply. "Gratitude is not why we came," Vane replied. "We came because kindness is not weakness. We came because a species that shows mercy to strangers when they are poor is a species worth saving. We came because the galaxy needs to see this truth." Around the holographic form of Van, the other beings began to appear. The Krell were represented by a commander, whose exoskeleton clicked and buzzed as it moved. The ethereals appeared as gaseous beings inside containment fields, their forms shifting and beautiful. The others were equally strange and equally impressive. This was not a small rescue fleet. This was a true alliance of powerful civilizations. Over the next hours, the combined military forces worked together. It was strange and difficult at first. Humans and aliens communicated through translation systems, trying to coordinate tactics and share information. But the need for victory pushed past the awkwardness. Yunji, despite her injuries, worked alongside Vane in a joint command center, planning attacks on Korathi positions. The Vethrai shared information about Korathi biology and tactics. They had fought the Korathi Empire before. That was why they had been fleeing when they crashed on Kepler 442b. They knew the weaknesses in Korathi fleet organization. They knew how their weapons could be used against them. The Krell brought their swarm tactics, coordinated movement of many small ships that could confuse larger weapon systems. The ethereals brought their ability to phase shift through matter, allowing them to move supplies and rescue trapped soldiers from behind enemy lines. The first real battle came 3 days after the Allied fleet arrived. The Korathi had not been expecting this level of opposition. They had been advancing against humanity alone, against an enemy they believed they could easily defeat. Now they found themselves facing an alliance of species, each bringing unique abilities and long experience in warfare. The battle raged near Saturn. Ships exploded in bright flashes against the dark of space. Korathi vessels, which had seemed invincible against human forces, found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought. The Alliance did not have more ships overall, but the ones they had were better coordinated and better commanded. Yunji watched from the command center as her own human pilots worked alongside Vethrai weapons specialists and Krell tactical operators. She saw a human fighter pilot named Ji-Ho pull off a maneuver that would have been impossible alone. A Vethrai navigation system helping him calculate trajectories that human equipment could not have managed. And the result was 3 Kurathi ships destroyed without a single human loss. "They are learning to work together," Vane observed, watching the same action. The Vethrai being sounded almost pleased. "They are learning that cooperation is stronger than individual effort," Yunji said. The battle lasted for 17 hours. When it was finally over, the Kurathi fleet was in retreat. It was not a total victory. The Kurathi were still powerful, still dangerous, but it was a real defeat. It was proof that they could be stopped. The human refugees who were watching from the safety of the defended territories began to believe again that they might survive. In the medical centers, where the wounded from the battle were brought, doctors and nurses worked alongside ethereal healers who could do things with medicine that humans had never imagined possible. Min-A stood in the medical center beside an ethereal being, watching as the alien healer worked with a human soldier whose injuries had seemed hopeless just days before. The ethereal's gaseous form moved with perfect precision, applying medicines and technologies that humans did not have. The soldier's breathing steadied. His vital signs improved. "Your kindness is remembered," the ethereal told Min-A. "My species owes human scientists a debt for the plague cure they created. We will repay that debt." Min-A felt tears on her old face. "Thank you," she whispered. The battle at Saturn was not the only one. Over the following weeks there were more engagements. Some were victories. Some were hard-fought draws. But the tide had turned. The Kurathi Empire, for the first time, was fighting a war it might lose. The Vethrai brought technology to humanity, weapons and defenses and tools for rebuilding. The Krell brought military knowledge and tactical expertise. The Ethereals brought medical advancement and scientific understanding. Other allies brought different gifts, each one contributing to the survival and strengthening of humanity. But more than the physical gifts, they brought something else. They brought hope. They brought the message that humanity was not alone, that there were other species in the galaxy who remembered kindness and who believed that such memory was worth fighting for. Yunji stood with Vane on a space station that had been recovered from Kurathi control. They looked out at the stars, at the vast space where ships were still moving, where battles were still being decided. "Your father asked me once what would happen if humanity faced destruction," Vane said. "I told him we would remember. I told him the Vethrai would remember his kindness. He did not believe such a thing was necessary. He believed kindness was its own reward." "He believed many things," Yunji said softly. "He was right about the important ones," Vane replied. "Kindness, shown without expectation of return, is the strongest force in the universe. Stronger than weapons, stronger than empires, stronger than any army. Your father understood this, and now the galaxy is learning it too." The Vethrai placed a crystalline hand on Yunji's shoulder. And the general, who had been trained in war and military strategy, found herself believing in her father's way at last. The final battle began when the Kurathi Empire, desperate and backed into a corner, committed all of their remaining military forces to one massive assault aimed directly at Earth. They had lost system after system. They had been driven back across the territories they had conquered. The alliance of species had proven to be more powerful and better organized than anyone had expected. The Kurathi leadership made a calculation. If they could destroy Earth, the center of human power, they could force humanity to surrender and negotiate from a position of weakness. It was a desperate strategy, but it was all they had left. The sensors detected the approaching Kurathi fleet 3 days before they arrived. It was the largest military force the Kurathi had gathered since the invasion began. Hundreds of ships, carrying the last of their weapons and soldiers. The Alliance called all forces to defend Earth. Yunji stood in the command center, her burns mostly healed now, and she made the final preparations. The human fleet was still smaller than the Kurathi fleet, even with the Allied ships included. But the Alliance had learned how to work together. They had learned how to use their different abilities to create something greater than any single species could achieve alone. The battle began near Jupiter's orbit. The first strikes were exchanges of long-range weapons, missiles, and energy blasts, lighting up the space between the planets. The Vethrai opened fire with their crystal weapons, which bent and focused light in ways that human physicists were still struggling to understand. The Krell released their coordinated swarms of smaller craft, moving in perfect formation, attacking from angles the Kurathi could not defend against. A young pilot named Ji-Ho, grandson of the engineer who had once worked with the Vethrai, flew his human fighter craft in formation with Vethrai scouts. He had trained with them for months now. The integrated systems in his ship allowed him to see what the Vethrai could see, to coordinate his movements with beings of crystal and light. He performed maneuvers that would have been impossible alone, banking and turning in ways that his human reflexes could manage only because Vethrai navigation systems were calculating the trajectories for him. "Fire when ready," Ji-Ho said into his communication system. 4 Kurathi fighters exploded into fragments of metal and fire. In the medical bays of the human ships, doctors and nurses worked to save the wounded. Among them was Hai Rin, a young medic who had grown up during the war and had never known peace. She moved between the injured with steady hands, applying medicine, stopping bleeding, offering water and comfort. When an ethereal healer appeared in her section, she did not hesitate. They worked side by side, human and alien, bound together by the common purpose of saving lives. The battle raged for hours. Ships exploded. Crews died. The fighting was brutal and desperate. But slowly, the Kurathi started to lose their advantage. The coordinated alliance tactics were working. The integrated command system, with Unji and Van working together with commanders from the other species, proved to be more effective than the Kurathi's single-species command structure. There was a moment about halfway through the battle when everything seemed to pause. The Kurathi flagship, the massive command ship of the invasion force, rose into position directly above Earth. It was a show of force, a statement that the Kurathi were still powerful and dangerous. The weapon systems on the flagship began to charge, preparing to fire directly at Earth. Every screen in the human command center lit up with warnings. If that weapon fired, it would destroy a city. Thousands would die instantly. "All ships, intercept course now!" Yunji shouted into the communication system. What happened next was a combination of brilliant piloting and desperate courage. Human fighters, Vethrai crystal ships, Krell swarms, and ethereal attackers all moved to position themselves between the Kurathi flagship and Earth. They formed a living shield, ships packed so closely together that they blocked the line of fire. The Kurathi weapon fired anyway. The explosion was tremendous. 12 ships were destroyed instantly, but the Kurathi blast did not reach Earth. It did not burn the cities or kill the civilians waiting below. The sacrifice of those 12 ships, human, Vethrai, Krell, and ethereal mixed together, had been enough. But it was also the final moment. The Kurathi realized then that they could not win. They could kill the Alliance, but they could not conquer. They could fire their weapons, but they could not reach the worlds they sought to control. Their final desperate assault had failed. The Kurathi fleet began to break apart. Some ships tried to escape. Others continued to fight even though victory was impossible. Within 2 hours, the last Kurathi ship was destroyed or captured. The battle was over. Yunji remained standing in the command center, barely able to believe what she was seeing. The screens showed no more Korathi signals. The sensors showed only the ships of the Alliance, damaged and wounded but alive and victorious. "We did it," someone said quietly. "No," Vane said, its crystalline form glowing brighter than Unji had ever seen it before. "We did it. All of us. That is the difference. That is why we have won. We are not one species anymore. We are an alliance. We are united by something stronger than military might. We are united by memory and by kindness." On Earth, people emerged from their shelter places. They went out into the streets, and they looked up at the sky. They saw the signals being transmitted from the orbital command center. The invasion had been stopped. Humanity had survived. In the medical centers, doctors and nurses celebrated with their patients. Mine, now very old but still moving with purpose, sat beside a window and looked up at the stars. She thought about Teo. She thought about the promise made on the red plains of Kepler 442b. She thought about kindness remembered across the years and across the distance between worlds. The Korathi Empire, which had seemed invincible just months before, had been broken, not just militarily, but strategically and politically. Other civilizations that had been forced to submit to their rule began to rise up and reclaim their independence. Word spread across the galaxy about what had happened, about how an alliance of species united by memory and mutual aid had defeated an empire built on conquest and fear. In the weeks that followed, representatives from all the allied species gathered on Earth. They came together not to discuss war, but to discuss peace and to make plans for the future. Eunji, who had learned to command warriors, now learned to negotiate and to build alliances that would last. Van stood with her on the high place where 20 years earlier the Vethrai leader had stood with Teo and made a promise. "Your father would be proud," Vane said. "He believed that kindness was the answer to the darkness." "He was right." Yunji looked at the crystal being beside her. "My father was wise," she said. "But I learned something too. He was right that kindness matters. But you taught me that sometimes kindness needs to be defended. Sometimes protecting goodness requires strength and strategy and sacrifice." "True," Vane replied. "Kindness without the will to protect it is weakness, but strength without kindness is tyranny. Your father and you, together, you represent the balance that the galaxy needed to find." In the days that followed, humanity and the allied species began the work of rebuilding. It was hard work, and it was work that would take years. But it was work done together, by species that had learned to trust each other and to believe in each other, and that made all the difference.